Right, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Training for Hiking live Q&A. As always, my name is Rowan Smith. I'm the founder of Summit Strength, and today we are answering your questions around training for hiking. So if anyone hasn't come across one of these streams before, the process is very, very simple. If you are watching live, you have any particular questions you'd like covered, feel free to pop them in chat, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, pop them in chat. I'll do anything I can to help. Beyond that, I have a few questions that have been sent through prior, which I'm going to work through and cover and talk through them as we go through. And the questions we're going to be covering is maintaining strength after an adventure, warm-ups for hiking, and also getting into lower back pain with loaded packs. Plus on top of anything else that pops up along the way. So today's stream will probably go for about 30, 40 minutes, something like that, depending on what questions we have coming through, and we'll take it from there. So to kick things off, let's get into the first question, maintaining strength after an adventure. So the question came here was basically, how do I maintain my strength after my big hike? And in this particular situation, the person posing the question has been training very diligently for quite a number of months leading up into a big adventure. And quite often hikers are really, really, really focused on, okay, I've got to get up to the big hike. I've got to get up to, where I'm training. And then after the adventure, they're like, oh, I'm going to have a bit of a break, recover, which is absolutely fair enough. But then they completely stop training. They kind of like go from weeks and weeks and weeks to potentially months and months. And all that strength and all that goodness that they've kind of built up kind of almost goes back to square one, which is a little bit of a shame. So the idea behind here is what we can do to maintain things coming back. And welcome, Bilal. Great to have you here again. I'll get to your question up after this one. We'll kind of dig into it. But basically, when it comes down to maintaining your strength after a big hike, good news is maintaining strength is much, much, much easier than building it in the first place. At first, when you're first getting into training, first developing your strength, your endurance, your fitness, all of that, it can take quite a while for things to kick into effect. Good news is it's much, much, much easier to maintain. The most important thing you want to be thinking about when you're looking at maintenance of coming into things is finding a level of training once you're out the other end of your adventure which you can be consistent with. And I always talk about consistency in regards to people's training being the number one most important thing, which is absolutely fair enough. But when we're in our everyday life, it is just as important. Because, when we do have a big adventure in our sights, when we've got a particular date we're leading to, when we've got a particular trip, it is relatively easy to kind of fit in quite a bit of training. I'm not saying it's always easy, that things come up and some people do struggle, but because we have that urgency, because we've got that thing coming up and counting down the days, relatively it's much easier to fit things in. But when we come out the other end and we're like, hey, I actually don't have a big date in my calendar. I don't have anything that's really pushing me. I'm not too worried and like stressing out about this particular mountain or whatever it may be. Usually it's not super realistic to keep on trying to fit in all the training you're doing prior. So what I recommend here is just adjusting your expectations a little bit. Ask yourself, how much strength training do I think I can stick with after my hike? So not what you're doing now, not what you think is, going to be like the best case scenario, but realistically, how much do I think I can stick with? This may be a case if you're doing 3 60-minute strength trainings right now, maybe a case of coming out the other end, you're like, actually, maybe I can do 2 sessions for 60 minutes at a time. Or maybe I can do 3 30-minute sessions or whatever it may be. What do you think is realistic? Just come up with an answer. And then from whatever answer it is, what I typically recommend here, you say a certain number and then just reduce it down a little bit. Take it down by about 25% or whatever you think is your first answer there. Because more often than not, we usually overestimate our ability to kind of do things. We usually overestimate what we can fit in. So it's better to be conservative and be consistent with a conservative number and fit in extra if you have the opportunity, as opposed to biting more than you can chew. So if you said, you know what, I can probably train 3 45-minute sessions in a week, maybe sort of go down to 3 30-minute sessions, or maybe I can do 3 60-minute sessions, maybe go down to 3 45-minute sessions, or whatever it may be. And essentially just use that as a framework for your strength training. From there, for the months ahead, then essentially the actual training you do in regards to the workouts and how they're structured and what goes in the work probably won't really change to what is a well-rounded training for hiking program. In the sense you still want to follow a structure with lower body, you still want to follow a structure with the upper body, a bit of core, a bit of lower limb, making sure you're covering all your bases. If you have worked through the DIY course, or if you work through my strength training mini course, whatever it may be, you can literally just use that information, use those templates or whatever it may be, and just keep on working through those same areas. But over the months, just make sure there is some element of progression. So what we're looking at is we're still keeping on a strength training journey. We're still having well-structured workouts. We're still progressing phase by phase by phase, but we're just doing less than what we were doing. We're maybe doing less volume, less intensity, or whatever it may be. That is literally the simplest thing to do. You just want to find something that's going to fit into your life and you can keep on going. Now, one thing that is important to keep in mind with this type of stuff is when you are in this sort of maintenance type of phase, if you're just training for a big adventure, realistically, you're not trying to maintain 100% of the strength or the fitness that you had just at your big trip. Because yes, we can maintain that for a certain amount of time if we really, really, really stay with it, but it's not super sustainable. It's not super sustainable to kind of like push all the time, keep on improving this and that. It's a little bit tricky. What I typically say is what we want to do is try to aim to maintain about 80% of that kind of peak fitness you worked up to be. So 80% of whatever you worked up to be will still have you feeling really, really strong. It'll still be great for your everyday adventures. It'll still be great for your regular day life. It'll still give you the opportunity where you can still keep on improving, but you're not having to push, 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 push. So just kind of keep that in mind that we're not trying to maintain peak fitness, but we're trying to sort of aim for that 80%. And if we can maintain this round about 80%, then if you end up booking in a big adventure and it kind of comes up, and you're like, hey, I've got 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks until I want to step out to a big thing, you can use that as a jumping off point to kind of ramp things up again. Now, a few little extra reminders of this type of stuff is, or extra tips when it comes down to this on the maintenance thing. Number one, set yourself reminders. Trying to stay consistent and motivated and all of that when we don't have a big trip pressing can sometimes be a little bit tricky. So set yourself reminders, say like write something down on the fridge saying, hey, I promised myself I'm going to do 3 sessions a week, or put it on your bathroom mirror, or put it something you'll see. So it's kind of in your face and you don't forget about the strength training. On top of that, a good idea is like setting rewards for yourself. I like to sort of say every 4 weeks worth of training. You set yourself the target saying in the next 4 weeks, I'm going to do 3 sessions in a week, or I'm going to do 2 sessions a week, whatever it may be. And if you get to the end of that 4 weeks and you've done that, you stuck with it, then give yourself a reward. Go out for a nice dinner, treat yourself, buy something nice, or whatever it may be. And just give that little acknowledgement for yourself that phase by phase by phase, or this by this by this, you're actually doing it and sticking with it. That positive reinforcement. And then finally, accountability, can always go a long way. Whether you have a training buddy you can bounce off, whether you've got a coach you can work with, whether you've got a partner or a friend you can chat with or whatever it is, find some element of accountability which can kind of keep you on track during this time. So it's not just you moving forward. So when it comes down to maintenance, it doesn't have to be too complicated, but basically just thinking about a realistic level of training that you can fit into your everyday life. Keep with a similar structure that you were doing before, but just pull things back a little bit in regards to time and potentially intensity. And that can really go a long way. So hopefully that answers the question there. If there are any follow-ups, please let me know. So Bilal, let me cover your questions here. I've got a few come through, and let me pop them up so I can read them. Oh, that doesn't really work. Okay, cool. So first question: if we have a multi-day hike with big mountain days coming up, how many days to taper in terms of strength training? Should we leave four gaps for leg day? Um, yeah, so basically when it comes down to taper for a big adventure, really depends on how big it is. If it is, say, a moderate challenge, and it's not like something that's going to be a really, 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 really massive stretch, or it's not like the big, big thing you've been leading up to, you can usually get away with like a 3 or 4 day taper, where you basically just for 3 or 4 days just pull things back a little bit in regards to your normal training, give yourself plenty of break, give yourself plenty of rest, and kind of lead into it. Alternatively, if it is something a bit more significant, you're like, hey, this is going to be a little bit more of a challenge. This is maybe the thing I've been building up to for quite a while, or whatever it may be. Typically, in the taper front, I usually look anywhere from 7 to 14 days, depending on how you're feeling. 7 days of taper tends to be, okay, 7 days of just like no more strength training, no more high intensity stuff. Basically, 7 days before your trip, where you're just doing some gentle pack walking and some stretching and some recovery stuff. And you can get 7 days of that. By the end of that, you're kind of like restless energy, ready to roll. That tends to work out for a lot. Or if you have a really, really, really big trip, or you're feeling really, really fatigued and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm absolutely knackered, the body really needs a rest, then a 14-day taper may look like the first 7 days is kind of moderate training, where you just keep on doing what you've been doing previously, but just reduce it down a little bit. So you may just look at your strength training, reduce the number of sets. You may take the interval training you've been doing, reduce the number of intervals. You may take the hikes you've been doing and just significantly cut it down. So you do 1 week of medium training and then 1 week of kind of um, very light training before you go. There's a lot of different ways of going about that, but I would sort of say moderate adventure, probably 4 or 5 days is probably enough. A big adventure, anywhere from 7 to 14 days, depending on your fatigue levels, how much of a stretch it's been, how long you've been training for. So hopefully that helps. Next question, do the smaller muscles like the calves heal much quicker than the big muscles like the quads and the glutes? Yeah, that's a bit of an answer. So I would sort of say not massively different. If you want to get really, really, really technical, there probably are some different muscle fiber types in regards to the calves and the quads and the glutes and how they kind of respond to fatigue and stress and this and that. But realistically, not a massive amount of difference. Probably the main difference that we often see from people with this is if you are noticing some areas that are taking longer to recover, is more likely than not those areas are doing more work in your training, or you're just working harder on those areas. In the sense of quads and glutes, when you're training, they tend to get a lot of exposure in lots of different exercises. Squats, step ups, step downs, even if you're doing deadlifts or glute bridges, like these areas get lots of different exposures. So they may just getting lots of extra work. On top of that, because these are bigger muscle groups, quite often we'll kind of be quite comfortable pushing those exercises a bit harder. So we'll work a bit harder, we'll use more weight or whatever it may be. Now, on the calf side of things, even though they're smaller, quite often we won't really push the training quite as much. We won't push the intensity quite as much, and they won't really get sort of worked quite as much in regards to different exercises. So, squats and deadlifts and all of this don't really work the calves. The calves only really get worked when we're isolating them almost. So I would sort of say it's probably not so much the difference in regards to smaller versus bigger. It's probably more a difference in regards to how much those areas are working and how hard we're working those areas. Next question is if I hike for more than 5 hours at an aerobic heart rate, 180 minus your age, will that lead to no aerobic development and doing 3 to 4 hours is just as good? So, could you, Bilal, for that one, could you possibly, oh, sorry, I missed the first half of your question. In training, is the duration of our activity after which the gain in aerobic adaptation measurable? So yeah, basically when it comes down to that type of stuff, it really depends on what we're specifically trying to develop. In regards to aerobic activity, there's lots of different ways you can train your aerobic energy system, whether you're trying to train your aerobic energy system for more maximal intensity. And what I mean by that is maximal intensity while still using our aerobic energy system, which is commonly referred to as aerobic power training or VO2 max training. Or if we're trying to develop the aerobic energy system in regards to capacity and like how long it can kind of sustain. For when we're looking at aerobic capacity specifically, this is the single most important aspect of fitness for hikers and mountaineers. The biggest training stimulus we get for that aerobic capacity is volume, meaning how much we're actually doing. So if we can basically stack on more minutes and more minutes and more minutes of working at this type of aerobic capacity, that's kind of where we see the sort of improvements. So I would sort of say when we're looking at the difference between hiking 5 hours plus versus 3 to 4 hours, working at that sort of heart rate, we're probably going to get more benefits in regards to longer duration because it's more exposure, that type of thing. It's more volume for that aerobic capacity. However, we kind of need to balance out with, okay, what can you realistically fit in? The most important thing to kind of keep in mind with this type of stuff is we're looking at aerobic training, we're looking at lower intensity stuff, working those heart rate zones, working over time. We just want to make sure that month by month by month and phase by phase by phase that we are progressing things. That's kind of the main thing to keep in mind. as opposed to 5 hours being better than 3 to 4 hours. It's sort of a case of saying, okay, is am I doing longer and more this month than I was last month? And am I sort of slowly and progressively building things up? And if we can build up volume over month by month by month, or just do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, this tends to be the best approach for aerobic capacity. Obviously there's a lot of other factors that goes into it. And we can, if you're like, hey, I'm already doing 6 hour hikes, I can't really fit in that much more, then obviously there's other things you can sort of incorporate to change the dynamics of that workout, looking at, extra elevation, looking at the pathway, looking at speeds and all of that. But as a general rule of thumb, more volume tends to be better, but we just want to make sure as a first principle, progression over time is the key. So hopefully that answers your question there. And then next up is lower rep training with heavy weights useful for hiking. Yes, absolutely. So typically when it comes down to strength training for hiking, there's a lot of different ways we can approach strength. A lot of hikers will naturally fall into the high repetition stuff in the sense they say, okay, when I hike, hiking is an endurance sport. When I hike, I feel like my legs are burning out on uphills or getting wobbly on downhills. And it happens after step after step after step. So they naturally think, okay, how can I improve that in the gym? I'm going to do endurance training. I'm going to do 15, 20 squats, get that sort of burn in the legs and help develop that. And yes, absolutely, that is beneficial, and that is definitely something that a hiker should be doing. However, there are just as many benefits for the sort of more difficult strength training as well. A lot of hikers overlook this. A lot of hikers don't really consider this, but it's just as beneficial. When we're looking at the heavier strength training or more challenging strength training, a few of the key benefits that sort of fall into that is number one, pain and injury prevention. Endurance training is definitely useful for pain and injury prevention on hiking. Strength training and heavier, more challenging stuff, just as useful in different ways. So if we're looking at preventing knee pain, back pain, ankle pain, or whatever it may be, getting exposed to some of this more challenging, more difficult stuff, very, very useful. Number two, the heavier stuff is really, really, really useful for elevation changes, uphills, downhills, purely for the fact if we can increase the maximal capacity of our muscles to produce force, it will make the relative intensity of each step much easier. Meaning every single step you take up will take less of your maximal strength and therefore will use less energy and be easier and easier and reduce fatigue. And then on top of that, heavier strength training will also very positively help you with your endurance training as well. So as much as endurance training is beneficial, sometimes we can do it, and then it can kind of like plateau and it's like, hey, I'm not really improving with this. It's getting a little bit hard to kind of do more squats or whatever it may be. Improving your own maximal strength will help with those workouts as well. So heavier strength training, very, very beneficial. The way that I typically recommend this for hikers is the way I like to approach it is kind of just splitting up your workouts in regards to strength and endurance. So what I mean by that is if you're looking at a 60-minute workout, you may do 10, 15 minutes of warming up, and then the remainder of the workout, you'll do half of that sort of heavier strength training, half of that high repetition endurance stuff. Very, very simple, but that works out very, very well. For pull-ups, below, definitely useful. It's not sort of 100% necessary for hiking, but it can be useful. It's a great catch-all exercise, which works a lot of the upper body, a lot of the back. Very, very useful. If you can do 5 pull-ups, that's pretty solid. And then you can basically progress that over time, whether you do your 5 pull-ups and every once in a while try to add a little bit more, whether you explore eccentric pull-ups where you basically put on a little bit of weight, you jump up to the top, so you're not actually pulling yourself up to the top, but then you slowly lower, or whether you explore assisted pull-ups where you're using a band or something which takes a bit of weight off and you can do more repetitions, or getting a mix of those things, and that's a nice way to progress your pull-ups as you go through. Now, next question. For big mountain days, do you recommend ascended the steep sections directly, which will work out the calves more, or do you reckon using this French step technique, which is where you ascend sideways? Realistically, for this, it really depends for you. Like, you often see online, you'll see these sort of buzz phrases where people are like, hey, this is the best way to go up hills, or this and that, or that, or you should be doing this, or if you're doing this wrong, or whatever it may be. The fact is, for hiking, there's just so many different considerations for every single ascent or descent you go up. in the sense that there's different steepness, there's different terrain, there's different, actually whether there's steps or rocks or they're even or uneven. There's your fatigue levels, there's your leg strength, how long your legs are compared to the steps. All of these things, change. So I typically say just do whatever's comfortable for you. If you are going up on a big mountain day and you're going up a steep section, you're like, you know what, the French step is working for me, go with that. Alternatively, if you're going up, steep section like I'm cooking out with this French step, I'm not enjoying it, then go up straight. It'll change from climb to climb. It'll change from person to person. I don't have a direct answer to that, but I would sort of say go through that. With the only consideration on that is the one thing that I do often say is if someone struggles with knee pain on ascents and going up steep hills, and they get a little bit of knee pain, one thing that I do often recommend for people is doing what's called the heel push technique, where as you're going up steps, when you're going up straight up steps or straight up a hill, but what you're trying to do as opposed to being stepping and being up on your toes, just trying to plant your foot and put a bit of weight through your heel. This could be a really, really good option for people who do struggle with knee pain going uphill because it gets the hamstrings and the glutes working a little bit more, takes a little bit of pressure out of the knees, and it goes a long way. So, long answer short, I would say just do whatever feels best for you, with the caveat that if you're getting a bit of knee pain, that can work out pretty well. Next question. For hot weather hikes, any tips in terms of hydration versus consumption of electrolytes, and which electrolytes do you recommend and how often to take them? So yeah, when it comes down to this, hydration, general rule of thumb, hydration is important for hot weather hiking. General rule of thumb, electrolytes important for hot weather hiking. Getting down to the specifics can sometimes be a little bit different from person to person. I would sort of say like in our everyday life, when we're doing our training or whatever it may be, or if we're on like relatively, not in the middle of nowhere, a good judge of hydration is using urine color. In the sense, if you have the opportunity to see what your urine looks like, um, general judge of hydration, if your urine is clear to straw colored, that means you're pretty well hydrated. If it's a little bit darker, that means you kind of want to drink a little bit more water. That tends to be a good judge of hydration if you can do it. I fully understand sometimes out on the trail it's not super realistic. So in that situation, what I recommend is kind of just getting a bit of a gauge in regards to how much you're drinking on the trail on those hotter days. Um, Go out on the trail, drink a certain amount of water, drink to your thirst or drink whatever you do, finish up the hike, go to the toilet and see what your urine looks like. If it is relatively clear to straw colour, that means whatever you drank for the amount of hours in that hot weather was pretty good and you're pretty well on top of things. Alternatively, if you finish up your hike and it's a little bit darker, then it's like, hey, maybe next time you want to drink a little bit more. So you just need to keep a track on how much you were drinking, how much for the hours. Gives you a bit of a rough gauge in regards to things. It's not perfect, but it goes a long way. Um, for electrolytes, very, very, very recommended for any type of hot weather hike, purely for the fact that when we are sweating on our hikes, we sweat out water, but we also do sweat out electrolytes. And one thing that can happen is if we are just replenishing water and we're not replenishing electrolytes, this can disrupt what's called the blood electrolyte, water electrolyte balance in the blood, which can get us into a little bit of trouble. We don't want. Supplementing electrolytes on hot weather hikes is absolutely essential. Typically, what I recommend is, there are lots of different ways. Amounts will vary from hike to hike, person to person. Very rough rule of thumb. If you're going for a hike which is, I don't know, maybe 3 to 4 hours and it's relatively hot, have a serving of whatever electrolytes you're using. If you're going for a hike anything more than 4 hours, maybe have 2 servings of whatever electrolytes you're using. General rule of thumb works out well enough. In regards to how often to take them, which electrolytes do I recommend? There are a million and one brands out there. Anything is better than nothing. There's 2 brands that I really like. Sorry about the white screen, everyone. One brand that's pretty high quality, can be really really good is Tailwind. Basically, this one, the reason why I like it, it is very very high quality. It's a very subtle flavor. So when you're having it, sometimes when you have like the store bought stuff, It's really, really sweet flavor, which is fine when you have a little bit of drink, but if you're having it for hour after hour after hour, it ends up just getting a little bit of like taste fatigue. We don't really want that. The tailwind is a little bit more subtle, so you can kind of drink it. And it's also designed to be a little, quite easy on the gut. On top of that, it's very high in carbohydrate, which is a good thing because quite often on the trail, most people tend to undereat and don't get enough calories in, don't get enough carbohydrates in, and that can lead to early fatigue. And this can just be a really easy way of supplementing your food and making sure you're fueling. Only drawback with the Tailwind, it is probably one of the more expensive products just because it's very well known and it's very high quality. So it is a bit more higher on the pricing side of things, but it is pretty good. If you're in Australia, one I quite like is like Trail Brew, which is very, very similar in regards to all those things I mentioned, but the price point is much better. This is kind of Australian based, and they can be really good. Or alternatively, you can literally just go down to your local, local supermarket and get some like powdered Gatorade or powdered Staminate. It probably won't have as much carbohydrates as these options. Probably won't. It'll be a little bit sweeter, but it can work out well enough, and that goes pretty well. Um, Next up, how do you recommend that one improves on the very technical sections of hikes mountaineering? The sections that require sustained technical scrambling. So yeah, when it comes down to this stuff, it's really exposure, in all honesty. Like the training that you do can definitely increase your capacities for this type of stuff. Your strength can increase your ability to do certain moves. Your cardio can reduce the fitness you associate in these situations. But realistically, for anything technical, it's just exposure. If you have the opportunity to book into mountaineering courses where you can practice these skills and get more exposure to these skills, doing weekend aways, whatever it may be, that is the very best thing you can do. If you like, hey, that's not super realistic or super expensive, whatever it may be, doing rock climbing is probably, a nice middle step. There's obviously a million and one ways you can go about rock climbing, but even just getting exposure to that type of movement where you're kind of a little bit more like vertical based as opposed to horizontal based and kind of getting confident with that, that could be really useful. And then there are also pretty good places to connect with other people. You can go into a rock climbing gym, you can talk with the staff there and say, hey, you know what, actually, I've got this coming up. I'm kind of trying to improve on this sort of aspect for my mountaineering. Then they may have some recommendations. They may say, hey, these certain routes may simulate that a little bit more, or maybe we're running certain days where we're going to go out to some crags or something, which may simulate this a little bit more, or maybe we have some in-house people who do adventures like this who can get a little bit more. So on the technical side of things, your training will help, but it really just comes down to exposure and just finding more of that. And then final one, the working through there. Do you recommend any exercises to strengthen the ankles that will minimize the chance of twisting an ankle? Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely got lots of things in regards to the ankles. So I'm going to pull up this video here and have a little talk through. So basically, I've got a video which kind of goes through this whole topic in quite a bit of detail. I'll briefly run through this while I'm going, but yeah, you can check out the whole video. Just pop it into chat. But basically, when it comes down to ankle pain, there's a few different things we kind of want to look at. Let me skip through. So number one, doing what we call direct ankle strengthening. So strengthening up the muscles which directly support the ankles definitely goes a long way. So doing things like, bent leg calf raises, where we're basically going up and down with some calf raises with your knees bent. Oops, let's skip that. This can be a good place to start. So getting a little exposure to the lower part of the calves. Next up, doing something like straight leg calf raises, very, very good to complement that type of thing, where we're getting exposure to, a little bit higher on the calves, goes a long way. And then even doing things like if you are particularly worried about this type of stuff, you can even do things like this where you're doing like banded exercises, where you're just getting exposures to different movements with your ankles. So just skimming through this. So you're getting a band, you're kind of looping around, and you can kind of get exposure to going one way or the other, or this and that, and doing this type of stuff. That's a really, really good first place to start, just for direct ankle strengthening, and that can go a long way for helping, minimizing the risk. Now, on top of that, other things you kind of want to explore for this type of stuff is general leg strengthening. So, any type of single-legged work in the gym is probably going to be beneficial for this. So things like your step downs, as much as we often talk about these for working the quads and working the glutes, can be really, really good for ankle stability because it has to do a lot as your ankles are kind of wobbling around. So this can be a nice one. Another one is doing like single-legged deadlifts. When again, the one-legged support, the ankles are kind of wobbling around, and that can definitely go a long way. Can be really, really useful. And then on top of that, like doing some type of like balance or proprioception training, where we're kind of like, this is a nice one. We're doing round the worlds where we're kind of standing on like a mat or a pillow or something a little bit wobbly and literally just looping a weight or whatever it may be around our hips. And as you can see, ankles are getting challenged there quite a bit. Um, oh yeah, anything kind of balance based. But if we kind of look at that context of, okay, a little bit of direct ankle strengthening through our calf raises or some of that banded stuff, a little bit of indirect strengthening through our single-legged strength stuff, and maybe a little bit of balance or proprioception work. Those three things together goes a long way. With the final caveat that one of the biggest risk factors for spraining your ankle on the trail is fatigue. And that tends to happen when we step in a pothole on the trail when we're tired, when we're huffing and puffing, and we're just not in our best self. We didn't really recover and this and that. So just making sure that we are also working on our cardio, making sure we're working on those energy levels, um, and that can go a long way as well. But yeah, for a bit of a longer answer, check out that webinar. It kind of goes into a little bit more detail. And yeah, my pleasure, Bilal. I know I just rushed through all of that relatively quickly, but hopefully that kind of makes sense. And yeah, and hopefully that gives you some good insight on that. So with that being said, let's come down and we'll cover this one here. Lower back pain with load packs. And this is a question I can't have had come through from someone just this morning. Basically, it just sort of said, hey, whenever I load up a pack, I get a bit of lower back pain. And they're just curious, is this muscle weakness, is something else going on, or whatever it may be. And this is a really, really common thing, in general day-to-day life. So many people have lower back pain, just from the way we live our lives, the way we sit, our posture, a minimal movement, whatever it may be. There's a million and one factors that goes into lower back pain. Very, very common. And for a lot of people, loading up a pack can aggravate this. Some people, it's when they load up a full pack and they kind of got something a bit heavier, something a bit more challenging. For some people, it's just the second they put on 2 or 3 or 4 kilos, that lower back starts to get sore. So if you're in the situation where a pack is aggravating your lower back, a few things you just want to consider. I'm going to kind of list off a bunch of different things, and this is sort of good stuff to play around. Now, first and foremost is the hip belt. Like this tends to be for people who are going out and they're doing the day pack stuff with a loaded pack and they're using that for training. If you are doing that and you're doing with a pack which doesn't have a proper hip belt and it's just like a little hip belt, but it's not very substantial or it doesn't have a hip belt at all, that is your first place to start. Purely for the fact that the hip belt is designed to make sure the weight that you're using sits a little bit better for you. That's the first place to start. If you're not using it, find a pack, borrow a pack, get a second-hand pack, whatever it may be, which has a proper hip belt. It goes a long way. Number two, pack fit. Again, next thing you want to look at is my pack fit for me? If it's not fit for you, if you haven't actually looked at pack fit before, definitely worthwhile looking into. Go into YouTube, type in how do I fit my pack. On top of that is if you maybe have fitted it previously, but it's been 6 months since you've done it or 4 months since you've done it, maybe go over it again because straps get loosened, things get out of whack. Definitely a great place to look. On top of that is weight distribution. A lot of people, when they're loading up their packs, they'll use dumbbells or they'll use like weight plates or they just use lots of heavy stuff and it'll just sit at the bottom of the pack, won't be very comfortable. Ideally, when we're loading up a pack for our training, we want to make sure it's distributed like we would when we're hiking. So if you're not sure how our pack weight should be distributed, just go into Google how to pack a hiking pack or how to distribute weight in a hiking pack. Pop that into Google, get a rough idea, and then when you're loading up your pack for your training, try to aim to do that. A simple way of approaching this, if you're using water bottles or something heavy, is get a bunch of towels, fill out your pack so the bottom of the pack is filled out with towels, and then have your pack heavier stuff in the middle. This is really, really simple stuff, but it needs to be said. And I would sort of say 75% of the time kind of comes down to this. Next up to look at is walking speed. If you are getting a sore pack and you're getting it while walking, one of the most simple things you can do to reduce stress through the back is your walking speed. Whatever speed you usually go, pull it back a little bit, take it a little bit easier, turn it into almost a dawdle. It sounds simple, but again, it can make a really big difference to what stress is going through the back and how it feels. This tends to happen for people who are doing pack walking around the local neighborhood on like a manicured path, or people who may be on the treadmill on the flat, or people who are in parks, or people on flat trails, purely for the fact that when we've had a nice easy surface, um, we can just end up power walking and ends up pushing a little bit quicker. We can get a bit uncomfortable. So next up. Beyond that, next thing you can kind of have a look at is warm-ups. In the sense, if you are aware that, okay, anytime I put a backpack on my back, I get a little bit of a sore back, then doing a bit of warming up may be your answer. Ideally, lower back, if that gets uncomfortable, we want to loosen up the muscles above and below the lower back. And if we can do that and get a little bit of extra mobility, a little bit extra movement through the muscles above and below that area, that can take pressure off the lower back. So when we're looking at the lower back, the two areas we want to mobilize, the middle of the back and the muscles around the hips. So when we're looking at mid back, a simple warm up might be doing something like the cat to cow stretch, which I'm sure most people have kind of seen before, where you're kind of on hands and knees and you're just going through between these two movements. As you can kind of see, we're just trying to get a bit of extra motion through this middle back here, loosen this up a little bit, so then the lower back can be a bit more comfortable. It's very simple, but it can go a long way. I'll pop that into chat and I'll pop these ones as we go through in a chat so you can check them out. Another one you can explore is if you are at home. You may not do this like if you're like hiking, but this can be useful when you're at home. Is doing a little bit of rolling on the mid back. So getting like a roller, you can even use a water bottle. And basically all you're doing is just rolling up and down on the middle back. You can kind of do some like little crunches here and basically just doing a little bit of motion where you loosen up that middle back can go a long way. You can kind of do a little bit of rolling up and down, which is demonstrated a little bit further down. Very simple, but can go a long way. And sometimes literally just getting a little extra motion in those areas can be enough just to help things feel a bit more comfortable. Um, and then then in regards to the hips, as we said, we want to hit the middle of the back, and then we also want to loosen up a little bit below. So it tends to be the hips. Two areas that can kind of work here is number one, doing like a glute mobilization. So this is like a piriformis stretch, also known as where you kind of sit down, one leg across the other, and literally you just start leaning forward. You'll feel a bit of a stretch in the bum and the glutes, and this can be really nice. You might do this 10 or 15 times. Very simple, but can quite often help. Let me pop that in the chat before I forget. And then the last one is doing like, there are a million ways to do your glute, your hip mobilization, like the front of the hips. But one I quite like, which you'll often see me share, my YouTube wants to load, it's been very slow. Let's sort of say worlds. Here we go. Is like doing the modified world's greatest stretch, which if you've seen my stuff before, I use this all the time, but this can be a nice one which hits the front of the hips, where we're basically just in hands, knees, one knee back, and then reaching up. You tend to feel a nice stretch through the front of the hips there. Those things in combination, loosening up the mid back, the front of the hips, and the glutes, can be really useful and can quite often take a lot of pressure out of the lower back. And then two more things on this front. I'm talking through quite a bit, but just to talk through bracing. How often have you heard the topic of squeeze your abs? You've gone into a gym class, you've been in the gym, and someone's like, activate your core, squeeze your abs. A lot of people don't really know what that means. Bracing, abdominal bracing is kind of what that is. If someone says, hey, squeeze your abdominals or turn your core on or whatever it may be, that's known as bracing. Simplest way to get that feeling is what I want you to imagine is if you're sitting there right now watching this, and if I walked up to you and I got my fist and I gave you a little bit of a punch in the side, and you just and you imagine I come up and try to punch you in the side. Immediately, if you feel that, you tense up. You get tension through the front of the abs, the side of the abs, all around the back, and you kind of feel like there's quite a bit of tension around there. That's what's known as the abdominal brace. Essentially, doing a small amount of that while low pack walking can sometimes help in this situation. So essentially, what you can think about is as you're walking along, just kind of try to feel a little bit of tension through these areas, the front of the abs, the side of the abs, and also around the back. It's not a case of actually squeezing it on, so there's all this tension, it's super tight, you can barely move, but it's just a little bit of tension. You're just trying to keep that awareness a little bit. If we have a hip belt, this can be quite useful. We can actually feel our abs pushing against the hip belt just a little bit. This can sometimes just help take a bit of pressure out of the back, keep you a bit more comfortable. So they're really, really simple things you can explore if you get this, which can make a pretty immediate difference. Beyond that, as a long-term strengthening thing, other things you can look at, building up strength through the glutes, through things like glute bridges and single-legged deadlifts and this and that, exploring things like core strength can go a long way. If anyone was interested in learning a little bit more about core training and this and that, I'll share this article here. This kind of goes through a few simple exercises options, which can be great for hikers, kind of covers a lot of bases. I'm losing my voice after chatting today, so I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. But if you want to learn a little bit about core training, yeah, check that out, and hopefully that will help. So, on that note, obviously covered quite a bit today. So, hopefully that was useful for people who are watching. As I said, I'm losing a little bit of my voice right now. I've been talking for 45 minutes straight. And yeah, I need to give it a little bit of rest. So I'm going to call it there. But yeah, hopefully today was useful for a few people. If there were any questions or follow-up questions for any of the stuff that I covered today, please let me know. Next couple of calls, Friday and Tuesday, not going to be happening for live stream. Got some appointments I need to make, but I'll be back in action in a week and a half with this. So if anyone has any questions they'd like me to cover in future streams, please just let me know and we'll take it from there. But aside from that, for anyone watching live, great to have you here. I hope you've enjoyed it. Anyone who has watched in the future, hope you get a little bit of value out of this. Bilal, have a lovely day. Thanks for the questions. I hope that helped. So have a lovely day, everyone, and we'll talk to you all very, very soon.